see, we have a wide-ranging list of panelists with all diverse backgrounds, so I wanted to start by asking you all, what unique roles do emerging leaders play in different sectors?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to join you in such a beautiful city and with such great company. Thank you to Enrique and the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, Emilio as well. And so I, as a North Capital Forum Fellow, I think that this might be an example of emerging leaders working to make an impact. I think it's important, as well as you've seen, it's our goal to champion the North American way. This is what brought us all here today. And it's up to us, I think, to be able to create and define what that looks like for each one of us as we're coming together to collaborate and see how we can do business, improve lives, but ultimately tell some of these success stories, not just here where we all understand and embrace and celebrate this, but to take these stories back home with us.
So throughout this last week, which has been great, I've been introducing myself in different ways. And one of the ways I introduce myself is as a board member of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. So I've first-handedly been able to see how the North Capital Forum and the U.S.-Mexico Foundation has evolved in my 5 years there. But I've been there for 5 years, and we're talking about young bloods, right? And so in the context of your question, I always introduce myself as I was the token millennial board appointee that happened to be innovating in fintech. And while that's how it started, I've actually found that bringing that perspective to the board has certainly been my superpower. And I think as I look and have read of all the esteemed panelists here, I think in many ways, by being these young blood innovators and influencers in this evolving North American opportunity, I think that creates a huge advantage for us. And I look forward to hearing every one of your individual stories of how you guys are impacting that.
So first of all, I thought this morning that this conversation was going to be like me and the 5 friends I told to come, and I'm pretty excited to see the crowd that came here, so a little bit nervous about that. With that being said, the short answer to the way the young blood should be contributing to leadership and making decisions and stuff is bringing new perspectives, right? That's basically the short answer. I'll extend my thought a little bit. There's an underlying premise on the world right now that every time I mostly speak every week about nearshoring and the big economic trends and whatnot. But there's one important thing that I don't think it's taking into account so seriously, which is the way the consumers, today most of them being young, millennials, Gen Z, and so on, see the world, consume, and behave. For my generation, the way I interact with life is very different from the way that my parents grew all the way up to interact in their context. My parents, for example, my dad always tells me that when he was younger in high school, he used to literally fight against the ones that were pro-communist to the ones that were pro-capitalism, right? When he was, 15 or so. That was kind of the big ideological fight. At the same time, when he turned on the TV in Mexico, he had, 3, 4 channels at most, Canal 2, Canal 5, 7, and I don't know which one more, 3. I don't know if my dad in his young age had to put on CDs, but at least when I was younger, I had to put Blink-182 and then stay hour and a half listening to Blink-182 and then the next. But now, and also in terms of political parties, almost the same story. The US still has 2 political parties. In Mexico, we had 1, then a second one, but they were all like these big 2 things to see, to watch, to interact with. And for my generation, that is completely untrue. If I want to listen to music, I can hear to every music that I want, moved from classic music to rock, to pop, to reggaeton, to whatever in a second. If I want to turn on the TV, I can watch Netflix, HBO, Apple, Disney Plus, all of those. And within those, I have a whole variety of things to watch. And I could go on and on and on and on with a lot of examples of what I'm trying to say. But the thing is, our society, the way in which we interact with society and the world is substantially different. And that brings us with a lot of interesting dichotomies that I kind of started thinking about during this North Capital Forum. On the political front, we spoke a lot about nationalism and kind of national sovereignty vis-a-vis what we're going to do as a region. That's a contrasting dichotomy that we need to solve. On the social part, we need to handle niche identity politics. Everyone is in their own niche. The LGBT movement, for example, and I don't say this in a bad thing, but in a positive way, it's now covering the entire alphabet, right? Now it's LGBT, and I don't even know where we are standing now, because everyone is finding their niche identity. But at the same time, we need to figure out what being North American means. How can we tackle that niche identity politics into a more regional perspective? And on the economic front, we need to tackle the way in which we're going to foster local economies, how we're going to bring back communities that have been displaced or that have been forgotten for a long time, while at the same time thinking on a regional view in terms of economy. So that was a very long answer, just to say that my generation brings a new perspective and a whole different way in discussing things, which definitely is not trying to find the solutions on the way they were done in the past. We need to see the world in a whole different way.
And you, Mario?
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad to be here. So I'm from the World Economic Forum based in Geneva in Switzerland, and I completely agree with what the panelists have said. I think I'm going to offer a more concrete example on what the forum is doing to try to engage younger people. Because as some of you may know, the forum tries to bring together the public sector, the private sector, and civil society, as well as academia, at a very high level. So you see the CEOs, you see the leaders of different countries, especially in Davos, but we also have other events during the rest of the year. However, around 15 or 20 years ago, the leadership at the forum decided that it was also important to bring younger leaders and younger people to our discussions. So the forum has different initiatives and programs that try to engage younger people, such as the YGL community, the Young Global Leaders. Maybe you've heard of that one. The forum every year selects between 40 and 50 people, I think below 40, I think that's a threshold, who are promises and who are showing that these are people who are going to have a big impact in the future. And we choose people from governments and from companies as well as startups. We also have another community called the Global Shapers. This is a community of more local leaders, and we have like these Global Shapers hubs all around the world that are self-run and attached to the forum in some way, but they are more independent. And they also try to bring in and build communities all around the world of younger people who want to take part in the forum's initiatives and who are interested in showing the impact that they're having, both in the business, in the government sector, and in civil society. So yeah, I guess that's the example that I want to provide.
Super. Thank you. Nicole, I wanted to talk a little bit with you about this. The idea that your experience, you were put in pretty much high-level roles at a young age, and so you've seen a lot of how policy formation has shifted and what that means to work at a grassroots level and what that means to work at a White House level and what it means now to work at a government affairs level. I wanted to ask, how has that shifted and what are some of the things that you're seeing from your experiences?
Thank you. And it's been an honor and also a challenge, I think, to have served in some of these capacities. I started out in my career as the head of public and government relations for a homeless association that was international. And so really looking at that time when we've had our economic challenges very early on in early 2000s in the US, a lot of folks struggling who usually were donating to charities were now needing that assistance. and learned what it looked like to convey that voice and those challenges to government. And so I feel like I came by lobbying more honestly in that of really representing some of the folks who have unfortunately fallen through some of our social security nets. But that's my introduction to politics, and bringing that perspective of some of our nonprofits, our service providers, to our government leaders to be able to share the perspective that ultimately informs our policy. This process is what is necessary for our businesses. It's necessary for our charities. It's necessary for our own, for us to represent our own stories, and make sure that our elected officials know what it looks like to truly bring our needs into our capitals and into our bills and policies. But ultimately, I went full in and ended up working in politics directly with Senator Cory Gardner. And I said to Sarah last night, I worked, I would say fortunately, when bipartisanship was still cool. And we actually like to work with each other and across the aisle. And obviously would love to continue to see more of that. Fortunately, I've learned, having had the opportunity to serve as head of African American Affairs for the last 2 years of the Trump administration, that even in very contentious times, fortunately, at least in the US, no matter Democrat or Republican, our elected presidents usually have at least 2 bipartisan wins in their first 2 years of their administration. And we were able to see this during my time. An example of this was with criminal justice reform. And I would say what would be important maybe for us to continue to realize is that it takes non-traditional partners coming together to recognize win-wins. We may not agree on everything, but to be able to find where we do and make progress on that, it can create some very unconventional opportunities, as you would have a Republican president who's championing a very maybe non-traditional issue that gained bipartisan support in Congress. We need to continue to see that, but that happens when we choose to come together.
Thank you. And Pedro, I wanted to bring you into this conversation. You spend a lot of your time talking to private sector companies and government stakeholders on both sides of the border. I wanted to ask what you think is needed to ensure continued collaboration, given that Mexico has just gone through a governmental transition. The United States is months away from doing the same. Canada will do so as well. What do you think is needed to continue that collaboration?
Yeah, so 2 things: dialogue and institutions. Plain and simple. People, ideologies come and go, up and down, institutions stay. And so we need to work harder to keep those institutions solid. We need to foster them. They can be represented in different ways. USMCA is an institution in itself, but also we got the high-level economic dialogue. We have the US-Mexico CO dialogue. We have the Binational Security Council and so many others. So we need to foster institutions every time we move forward. And the second thing is dialogue. I think that we are in a time where people don't like or don't know how to listen to each other. I know it sounds somewhat cliche, but it is. We really need to learn that disagreement is an important ingredient in any democracy. It is okay to disagree between us, but it's not okay to turn disagreement into the other person being your enemy. I could disagree with you at the end of this panel, but I hope that in some way or the other, and after that, I hope we can get a tequila and hug each other and be okay with any other variety of issues that we can discuss. So those 2 things.
Super. And then Mario, you spend a lot of your time looking at data, and not only for the World Economic Forum, but for those of you who don't know, he's the co-founder of a wonderful newsletter called Latinometrics. If you don't subscribe, please do. I wanted to ask, what role do you see data playing in this new way of forming policy and doing business?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So part of the reason why we started Latinometrics 3 years ago was that we noticed that most of the news that came out from Latin America to the rest of the world, specifically in English, focused either on the violence or on the politics of the region, and most of it was negative. So I had been a subscriber of some similar data newsletters like Charter. I don't know if you follow Charter, but it's a really good one. And I had this idea that I mentioned to my cousin on, hey, maybe we could use data to show a different aspect of Latin America that not a lot of people are seeing, to try to highlight the potential of the region. So we like using data and charts. We're both economists, and we like using data because that backs up what you're talking about in each post. So if you follow us, you see that every time we post a chart, we also post a small article. And I think more news outlets should do that. Like, if you're making a claim, at least try to show some data to back it up. Because otherwise, if news is only opinions, it's very hard to distinguish what's an opinion or what's a fact. And at least by using charts in each one of our articles, we're able to stay a bit more neutral and just represent what the data is showing and try to give it a bit more context.
Very much agree with that. Nicole, you brought up a good point about saying that there's now untraditional players in this trilateral relationship. And that's something that I see a lot of, and I think Sean has seen a lot of it as well, coming from venture capital, and especially coming from a firm that he founded that is focused on macroeconomic tailwinds. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about those macroeconomic tailwinds on both sides of the border that underline your companies and your firm's really investment thesis.
Absolutely. So a little bit of background before I talk about the macroeconomic tailwinds that we've talked about is almost exactly a year ago, I was fortunate to be able to sell my first company. It was a fintech focused on lending to underserved small businesses, predominantly in the US Latino market. I'm also proud to say we moved not only over $300 million into the market, but 50% of all our borrowers were undocumented immigrants in the US. And of our team of 169 people, 130 resided here in Mexico. So we truly were innovating across the border between the United States and Mexico, commercializing a product for paisanos in the US, but predominantly operating out of Mexico. So for what it's worth, Enrique didn't just add me to the board as a token millennial. I knew a thing or two about the United States and Mexico. And having exited from the company, I had the unique opportunity to take a big step back and think about what I wanted to do next. And for what it's worth, the first fintech was a passion project. It was my first love. I actually was very dispassionate about my approach to this process because I fundamentally believe that you want to be objective about reading those tailwind opportunities. And I also know firsthand-handedly that, half of the equation of being, quote, successful in a startup or any venture that you pursue is positioning yourself in the right time, in the right place for that benefit from those tailwinds. And then the other half is good old-fashioned hard work and skills. And so as I was evaluating that first part of the equation and spent months digging in after taking some time off, we identified 3 tailwinds. The first was around one that everyone's very familiar with, but I'll maybe add a few stats to it, which is the US, Mexico, and North American opportunity. And I apologize for Canada because these stats do omit Canada, and I apologize for that. But we did some math around the size of the economy. And we sized it up at $1.4 trillion. Now, let me just break down a few stats on that. It's not just the aggregate $900 billion that's coming in through exports and imports, but here are the stats that you're probably less familiar with. First generation Latinos of Mexican descent in the United States spend $500 billion in the United States, of which $100 billion is spent by undocumented immigrants of Mexican descent in the US, and they send $60 billion from the US into Mexico every day. And we've only seen that trend growing year over year. And so we knew that playing a little bit into our strengths around financial services, that there was going to be a re-architecture or evolution of financial services that's moving that money, that's lending that money. And we thought we were very well positioned to take advantage of that. Insight number 2. We also realized that now with Gen AI, the cost of building a business from scratch or integrating into a small business technology and capabilities that give it enterprise level scale is the cheapest and most accessible it's ever been before, and that cost is going down. So ironically, this time around, and I apologize for the venture capitalists in the room, you probably don't need as much money as you used to build a company of scale, and you can actually bootstrap your way into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially billions of dollars, with a substantially lower risk and a much higher upside. And the third thing we realized is that now we're also talking about demographics and young blood. We're also seeing a huge shift, the largest transfer of wealth in ever and in a generation between baby boomers and the next generation through business ownership. In the United States alone, there are 2.1 businesses owned by baby boomers that are shifting their ownership in the next 10 to 15 years. And so that creates a very unique opportunity to buy into these businesses, integrate AI, and if you can, play within the arbitrage opportunities between the US and Mexico. And so long story short, we've created a holding company that is capitalizing on this opportunity. It's called Cintar Group, and we're very still early stages, but very excited about the tailwind opportunities from within.
Super, thank you. Mario and Pedro, I wanted to bring you both back into the conversation. Both of you, I think, have had the opportunity to see technology in action. And I wanted to ask, how does technology play a role in shaping this collaborative environment that we're all looking to have?
Okay, I'll talk a bit about the Trade Tech initiative that I'm part of at the forum. So this is an initiative that started around 3 years ago, and the goal was to shine a light and give more visibility into how technology is helping shape global trade and logistics. And around 2 years ago, we partnered up with the Ministry of Economy of the United Arab Emirates because they want to transform their country, specifically Abu Dhabi, into an innovation hub for trade. So since then, we've been collaborating with them, and we've been hosting an annual event in Abu Dhabi. We've been publishing a lot of content, and we've been building a community of over 700 members, including startups, big companies like the big shipping companies, as well as people from the public sector who are passing laws and regulations and who can offer advice on what type of products are needed to make, I don't know, customs faster, etc. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in a few areas on trade specifically. So one is customs automatization and document. A lot of documents are still sent via PDF or Excel files. So we're seeing a lot of startups who are trying to build like these unified dashboards that synchronize data more quickly between buyer and seller. We're also seeing a lot of optimizations in inventory management in warehouses. So we're seeing a lot of, like maybe you've seen the Amazon warehouses that are using robots to sort and prepare products. And there's also a lot of AI coming into optimizing similarly these warehouses, but also shipping routes. So a lot of ships are starting to use AI to optimize their routes to lower their fuel emissions and be able to ship goods in a more sustainable way. And one of my favorite startups that I've seen is one that is building these foldable containers. So I think almost like half of all transport of containers are empty containers. Many of you may have the correct number, but what this startup is doing is trying to build these foldable containers so that you can stack 4 containers on top of each other. And that's going to reduce already like the transport of 4 containers into just one. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of optimizations and a lot of entrepreneurs building on this space, which is pretty exciting.
So I think that when talking about technology, there's a huge array of examples where we could kind of go in terms of trade, semiconductors, Apple's over here as well. I mean, tons of issues. Let me just focus on one. I'm going to miss a ton of examples. But one of the things in which capitalism failed was in the whole concept of the trickle-down economics. We betted that all the free trade agreements that we did in the 80s, 90s, and beginning of the 21st century were gonna move everyone out of poverty. We're gonna bring tons of opportunities to everyone around. And that is why, as I was speaking with Fernanda Guaro later on, previously, the whole concept of shared prosperity is kind of the slogan that everyone is using across the board. Why? Because that is the issue that has led us to have tons of polarization, tons of political backlash, social unrest, and whatnot. So to answer your question, I think that technology needs to be the fuel that can actually make those disparities grow shorter in a shorter period of time, that need to help small and medium-sized enterprises to truly plug into a more regional, international economic market, among many other things. So technology needs to be the ingredient used to reduce inequality across regions and across companies and across people.
Great. And speaking of technology, I did want to bring up an important element that didn't exist 30 years ago, which is social media. And I wanted to ask Nicole what her thoughts were on social media and how policy has changed now that that's a whole new method of reaching out to people, and also another method to get your own message out, even if you're coming from a grassroots level.
So ask the former Trump staffer about tweets. Is that what we're doing? No. Obviously, it's been a tool that's been highly leveraged across all sectors, and can obviously have direct and immediate impact on all of our lives. And I think it's important for us to know that, especially at a time with decreased, I think trust in institutions, I think in government right now, the lack of ability in the US Congress to even pass legislation. We're legislating by sound bites and messaging these days. And I also think that in a way shares power, honestly, to all of us, in the fact that our voices are able to also influence. And so I think that being able to know how to leverage the network and these tools effectively, I think actually gives us the vehicle to be able to influence and share our perspectives. So, but it's, yeah.
How are these young leaders, especially in such wide-ranging fields, facing or confronting traditional leadership norms? How are they leading, and what are the challenges that they will face or are facing right now?
How are we leading? All right, that's a big question. I think I'm going to take the flip side of the answer, which is I don't think we're doing enough to lead. I actually think that the opportunity impact to young blood potential ratio is not even close to where it needs to be. I feel like we all have heard of the entrepreneurial spirit amongst those that are on the younger end of the demographic, but I'm still now one of 2 millennials on our board, and there are 17 people on our board, right? And I think that we could do more around engaging. I think I give the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and the North Capitol Forum so much credit for creating these forums so that we can voice our views. And so we also need to collaborate more with those that came before us to make sure that we create these spaces to talk more. But I do think that that we could be doing more for the opportunity that there is.
I think it's our responsibility to convey to our current leadership truly our experiences, and some of that has to do with post-pandemic and economic challenges. We're experiencing a mental health crisis globally. I believe it's for us in the US, 1 in 5, globally 1 in 8 are experiencing these challenges. And we know that this is affecting the workforce. We know that we need to make adjustments in how we consider providing these. We have a leader in this room, Mario, who knows this and is working on this behalf with companies, and we need more who are stepping forward to change and address this dynamic. And we'd be remiss if we also don't realize that this is impacting our elections. And we need our leaders who are willing to call this out and actually do something about it.
Very tough question. So I think 2 big things. I think that one is whenever a young leader gets to some place somewhat relevant, we do have a responsibility to keep on pulling up the rest of our generation, right? We need to move away from a selfish leadership, and we need to build the new generation that needs to start making the decisions and holding to power positions. And the second one is the values that we imprint into that. And here, I'm not really sure if it's a generational thing or it's just a personal thing. I'm not really sure. But the only thing I would say is kind of go and see the way AmCham has been transformed for the past 2 years. And again, I don't want to put this into me, but I think that I have a very powerful team of leaders, also young blood, and some others that are the CEOs of the big companies that trusted in putting this responsibility to a 29-year-old guy, which I think is quite brave and risky, but I hope you guys made the right choice. And but we need to move forward in a more horizontal way. We need to move forward in a more open source way of thinking, putting proposals forward, sharing things, sharing information, building communities. That's my answer.
And okay, so yesterday I had breakfast with my tia abuelita, and she's 94. And I was asking her how much, in Torreon, back in Torreon, so smaller city, more community than in a big city like this one. So I was asking her how have times changed from when she was a teenager to today, because she also has teenage grandnephews. And she was telling me, going back to social media, that with technology and technology, phones and social media are bringing us closer to people that are far away, but are putting us further away from people that are close to each other. So I think that was a pretty good way to put it, because with tech you can have infinite leverage to reach a big audience, and I've seen it with my blog. Like this is just something that I started on my laptop, and now it reaches millions with every chart that we make. So yeah, I guess it's just each one of us needs to find that balance on just don't spend your time dumb scrolling on TikTok and Instagram, and use tech and social media on a way to show who you are, express who you are, or share your thoughts. And yeah, because it's definitely a really powerful tool. My favorite app, and I often think about this, is Google Maps. Like, imagine if, I don't know, if Julius Caesar had Google Maps, or like, or Napoleon, or like, or if you were like fighting against Napoleon and you had Google Maps and you could see like real time work. Like, it's, we take this for granted, but this is such a new tool and it's so powerful. But yeah, it's just, sometimes we lose track of it. But yeah, it's just, I think it's good to keep a perspective, like over long periods of history. The access of technology that we have right now, it's truly powerful. So just don't let it use you. Instead, you use it for a greater good.
I think that's a wonderful takeaway. And with that, I am going to wrap it up. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us today.